So if you are trying to develop a regime of exercises that you need to keep chipping away at over time to get to where you want to be, they must include some joint-based exercises. G'day and welcome back to the channel. So in today's video, I want to talk you through the things that I find really important when trying to solve a hunchback posture or a thoracic kyphosis. Now these tips will be based on the things that I find work clinically really well, and they'll encompass a couple of exercises that I think everyone needs to at least try to see how this makes you feel going forwards. But I also want to give you some perspective that I don't think a lot of people tend to take with them when trying to solve a kyphosis long term. So if you do go on to find this video helpful and useful, please consider leaving a like rating down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new. And if you do find that this fills a missing piece of the puzzle for you, please also consider a super thanks donation. It's just a great way to help support the channel and allow me to keep making these videos going forwards. Now, before we get into these exercises that I want to go through, I just want to have a quick chat about the right perspective that you might need to have to fix this kyphosis long term. And the first thing that I think is really important to understand is that there is a small proportion of hunchback postures and thoracic kyphoses that are genetic, or at the very least have a genetic component. And the obvious point to make around that is if there is a strong genetic component to your hunchback posture, it might be difficult to completely reverse that thoracic kyphosis long term. But the really important thing to think about on top of this is, despite whatever percentage of your kyphosis that might be attributed to a genetic component, we don't know, or no one can tell you exactly how much of that is due to a genetic issue and how much of it is environmental. So much like everyone else who will be watching this video as well, whether it's genetic or not, we still want to try the same things because you don't know how much of that you can wipe away and get you closer to where you want to be long term. So the exercise that we'll go through will apply to you just as much as everyone else. We just might have a slightly lower expectation as to how much straighter your upper back will become if there is a genetic component. Now, the second important thing that I think is really important to get across before we get into these exercises is we need to look at everything around that thoracic spine. So traditionally what I see a lot is with thoracic kyphosis exercises and exercises to address hunchback postures, there is an overwhelming focus on the musculature of your upper back and even your chest to a lesser degree. Now, the important thing I think everyone needs to realize is that with any thoracic kyphosis, there's a very strong skeletal component to that. And by that I mean the thoracic spinal joints and the joints of your rib cage, predominantly around the back and potentially around the front as well, because they are all connected. So if you are trying to develop a regime of exercises that you need to keep chipping away at over time to get to where you want to be, they must include some joint-based exercises. And I'll go through one today that I think is really, really important for everyone to try. But if you're just doing muscle stretches, it will not get you to where you need to be long term because it doesn't address the underlying skeletal dysfunction that often causes that musculature to be tight in the first place. So even if you're taking the time to decrease the thoracic joint stiffness and your ribcage stiffness, as well as any overlying muscular tightness, that will genuinely account for nothing if you aren't then putting your body into better shapes. The reason for that is if you're consistently getting sucked into bad thoracic postures, whether that be at home or at work, on the couch, sitting up in bed at night, driving around in the car, whatever it might be, if your thoracic postures don't improve, then you're not going to short circuit that consistent signal that your body's been receiving for potentially months, if not years, that you value that hunchback shape, that you value your tissues being stiff, you value them being tight, and you value that relative weakness that you may have accrued at the same time. So you need to make sure that you're taking time and investing your mental energy into trying to get into better positions more often, but also trying to catch yourself throughout the day and reassess what positions that you're into. So getting into these exercises, the first exercise that I wanted to go through is an exercise that I find really helpful at reducing thoracic spinal stiffness and rib cage stiffness, potentially better than most things that I've seen. And all you need to do here is you need to get a peanut or essentially 2 tennis balls or 2 lacrosse balls that you tape together. You can definitely use a foam roller if you want to. I just find that this is a little bit more specific and gives you a little bit more maneuverability and a little bit more specificity in terms of where you find that stiffness and getting rid of that stiffness going forwards. So a great way to do this is if you can have some sports tape, you can use some duct tape, whatever you feel works for you. And then all you want to do basically is get your two balls together, tape a strip essentially around the outside of those balls just so that they stay relatively together. And then what we want to do on top of that is basically tape through the middle just to keep them together. So basically putting the tape on the outside, wrapping this around the middle just so that it holds it all together in a really nice way. So essentially that is a self-made peanut that you can do at home. There are some official ones that you can buy, and I'll leave a link in the description if you want to see what they look like. But I find a simple do-it-yourself version works extremely well. Now, before we do any of these exercises, what we want to do is we want to make sure we get a before and after baseline so that you can see exactly what these exercises do for you and how they make you feel. And a great way to do this is we can do two quick movements. The first is by crossing your arms across your chest. We know that the thoracic spine has a bias towards rotation. The way that the spinal joints are angled, all of those rib joints are angled, it really does allow us to rotate from side to side. So what I want to get you to do is being up nice and tall, crossing your arms across your chest, just rotate as far as you feel comfortable in both directions. Take note of how that feels, how stiff or tight it may or may not feel. And then the other thing we want to get you to do is to cross your arms, keeping your lower back stable. Just try and lift your nipples or your chest up. So don't sort of arch backwards, don't just look up. Really try and lift your chest up as far as you feel comfortable, just to get a sense of how much thoracic extension you have, which is obviously the opposite to the hunchback thoracic kyphotic posture that we're trying to change. So the way we want to do this exercise is we want to take this ball and place it on the ground. And ideally we want to do this close to a bed or a chair or something that you can hook your hands underneath behind you. But what we want to get you to do is have the ball placed in between your shoulder blades with the bumps down the middle of your spine in the little cradle created by the balls. And then what I want to get you to do here is keeping your belly drawn in, reaching above you as far as you feel comfortable, hook your hands under something that's not going to move like a table or a bench. And all I want to get you to do here is take a deep breath in. And then once you've got that deep breath in, I want to get you to gently push up into the surface that you have your hands slid under. And what this is going to do is we're going to expand our rib cage by breathing. We're going to hold that, and then we're going to use muscle activation to help free up any joint stiffness underneath, but also any tight musculature underneath. And we want to hold this for about 5 seconds, then breathe out, and then gently roll the ball down lower than what you had it previously. Again, take a deep breath into the ball. Push up through your hands, hold that for a few seconds, and then relax. And the great thing about this is that we're segmentally working our way up and down that thoracic spine, spending time on the spots that you feel are the most stiff, tight, and restricted. And then we're reaching above you to encourage that thoracic extension, and then pushing up into something to engage a lot of the chest musculature and the shoulder musculature as well, and hopefully get to any musculature that is tight and allow that to reduce at the same time. So the benefit about this peanut exercise is you're getting both joint mobility through your thoracic spine, potentially some rib cage mobility as well by taking a deep breath in, but it's also hopefully capturing some of that surrounding muscular tightness that may also be restricting your movement. Now again, you can play around with where you put the ball, where you feel you need it most. You might find that you need to rotate one side more than the other just to bias one side that might feel stiffer than the other. But then what I want to get you to do immediately afterwards is you should genuinely feel like it's moving and extending and rotating further than it did before. And if you come back to this and you think, gee, there's one spot that feels a little bit stiff and tight that I didn't get to, then obviously get to work on the ball to free up that spot, repeat the process, then retest again to make sure that you're nailing those spots. Now the second exercise that I think is really helpful to do, again, is a little left of center, but it involves a variation between a muscular strengthening exercise and a mobility exercise. And one of the exercises that I find really good for this is something with a band of some sort. So whether it's a TheraBand, some TheraTubing, whether you've got cables or a power band, whatever it might be, doesn't really matter too much. All you want to do is tie it to something again that's not going to move. And then what I want to get you to do here is either sitting up nice and tall or kneeling, depending on how you feel doing this exercise. We want to make sure that you are in a really up tall position in as much sort of thoracic extension as you feel comfortable. What we're going to do here is we're going to do a thoracic rotation movement. So being up nice and tall, arms out straight, twisting through that thoracic spine. We want to make sure that the rotation is coming through your chest area. We don't want you to feel like you're twisting through your lower back as much. We don't want you to feel like you're bending off to the side at all. It's not going to be as specific as what we want. But being up nice and tall, arms out straight, trying to really rotate through where those shoulder blades might be. And what you'll find here is not only are you going to feel some fatigue through your core and through your trunk muscles, but by using some of the musculature and by incorporating movement into this strength exercise, what we'll actually find is some of the tight muscular will start to release the more you use it, but you'll also find that some of that deeper joint stiffness that perhaps you couldn't get to with the ball might actually start to reduce a little bit faster because we're now incorporating thoracic rotation, a rotational movement into the equation. Again, what you should find is hopefully you'll get a little bit of fatigue from that exercise to improve the muscular strength of the area, but also you should then feel like it's suddenly a little bit smoother than what it was before and a little bit easier to get back into a more extended shape and out of that more hunched back kyphotic position. Now, the other important point that I need to talk about here, it's one thing to try and give you some exercises to help your conditions, but it's another thing to make sure that we understand exactly why you're having this conversation in the first place. What is causing these issues that we need to address as well if we genuinely want this stuff to go away long term. And for me as a physio, and what I find personally, and I can't speak for everyone, but this is what I find personally, is that aside from the genetic aspect to a lot of kyphosis and hunchback postures, the single biggest cause of a hunchback posture is literally getting into a hunchback position without you realizing it. And as I said before briefly, that can be sitting on the computer, sitting on the laptop, using your phone, sitting up in bed, reading a book, doing something. It can be driving a car. It can be sitting down on the couch watching TV. There can be any number of positions and shapes. It could be something as easy as standing, leaning over a bench all the time. It doesn't matter what activity you do. All that matters is the shape and the position that you put your back into more often than not. So as I said before, if you can't get to the point where you now value being in a better thoracic posture and you don't take the time and the mental energy to catch yourself throughout the day to reassess what positions you're in, it's almost unrealistic to expect your kyphosis or hunchback posture to change meaningfully over time. So we have to marry up good mobility exercises, some potential strength exercises with better postural habits throughout the day, as boring and as unsexy as that is, if you want to make sure that you can get to a point where you need to be. And again, even if you have a genetic component or a genetic reason for why you have a subtle or a less than subtle hunchback shape in your upper back, this same information applies to you. We don't know how much of that is genetic and how much of that is environmental because there's so much environmental stuff going on for most people. It's well worth your time to explore how much of it is genetic and how much of it is also maybe the shapes and postures that you drag yourself into. So I hope that was really, really helpful and really useful. If it was, let me know down in the comments below. If it wasn't, same thing, let me know. I hope that that helps give you some perspective on how to change this long term. I'm interested in knowing what sort of exercises you find are working really well for you. So let me know in the comments down below as well what they might be. But with that being said, I hope that was genuinely useful and I'll see you in the next one.